Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Scott Edinburgh. I'm the founder of Personal MBA Coach, and I'm here today to talk to you about ways to get ready for round one. So what to do if you're thinking about applications. We'll probably give it a few seconds more. I know a lot of people are just logging in. You're all in mute right now, in mute mode, but if you have questions, there's a little question field, so feel free to ask questions in the field. The way that the program works, they only show a little bit of the question at a time, so the shorter their question, the easier it will be to actually read it. But otherwise, we'll definitely scroll through, and I'll try to answer the questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to ask anything that's on your mind. I know I met many of you on the MBA tour so far. I've been doing a lot of talks with the MBA tour, 3 others this week. And so this is sort of the day in between where we're doing this webinar. So we will get started. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of myself, and then we'll talk through things to do to get ready. I went to MIT for undergrad, studied economics and business at Sloan. As part of their undergrad business program, I took a lot of MBA courses and was a teaching assistant for one of the MBA courses on negotiations. Then I began my career at Deloitte in consulting, worked in strategy and operations, mergers and acquisitions for a few years, and went to Wharton for the MBA. I'll go over how I chose Wharton at the end. I'll give an intro now and also at the end, since a lot of people kind of joined late. But anyway, I went to Wharton to study real estate. And when I was there, I founded Personal MBA Coach. My best friend was applying to schools. He used another firm with the application process, wanted, let's say, a slightly different approach. And I ended up redoing the materials with him. He ultimately got into Harvard, helped another friend get into Harvard, another friend get into Wharton, and have expanded the company since then. So we have some rankings rated on some of the sites that you've probably seen. In terms of what we do at Personal MBA Coach, and this is the last slide before we get to actual meat of the presentation. So we're an admissions consulting and tutoring business. We offer GMAT tutoring. We offer advanced planning for folks early on in the process who want to perfect the profile. And even though this says for round one, some people are thinking for round one for next year. So we have early planning. That way we can help folks think about how to prepare and improve their applications and their profile between now and when they actually apply. I'm on the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants Board of Directors, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. We do a lot with admissions directors throughout the year, and even have applicant evaluation sessions where we sit in rooms with admissions directors and analyze fake profiles, determine who should quote get accepted or not. And at Personal MBA Coach, we go through all the steps of the process. We also have a team of 12 former M7 interviewers to help with the interview prep. So there are actually only 6 weeks until the first round one deadline. So for some of you thinking of round one, it might be the case where, you know what, you might just not get everything done in round one, and that's okay. That said, if you are gunning for getting some things done in round one, we will talk about what that looks like and what a plan should feel like today. So, catch-up list. Okay, so things that you should probably have already sort of started to think through. At this point, ideally, you've finalized your school lists, you've scheduled campus visits. It's not important to visit every campus, especially in the summer when classes are not in session. One question I get, and if this was live, I prefer the live talks much better, but if this were live, I probably would get some questions about visiting schools and whether it's necessary to visit, and what about classes. So a lot of schools don't have classes during the summer. Most of them don't have classes in the summer. And pretty much at this point, there are no class visits that are open. So if you do visit, then you'll be visiting without seeing a class, and that's perfectly fine. But make sure to schedule these. You can also plan ahead and visit in the fall and maybe talk about that in an interview. So hopefully you finalize plans to take or retake the GMAT. Ideally, you're finished with the test. To be honest, if you haven't taken the GMAT yet at this point, and you're still thinking of round one, you might not be thinking of round one. And that's not for everyone. It's certainly possible to do that. We have a lot of folks that we're tutoring now for the GMAT. We have 7 tutors on our team, a very personalized and specific approach to tutoring, which we can talk about. So a lot of folks are doing tutoring with us, but depending on the progress, they might end up moving some of these things to round 2. And then ideally, you've developed your resume. We can talk a little bit about resumes later on today. So in terms of school lists, right, make sure that your school list is well-rounded. What I mean by this is, let's apply to enough schools. I saw someone earlier this week that said, I'm really interested in school X, and that was their top choice, and they said, I'm going to put all my eggs in that basket. And I sort of said that's not really a good plan. The process is random, the process is challenging. Even if you have the best support out there, it's random. You think about the admit rates of every 10 people who apply, maybe 7 of them are qualified, and depending on the school, anywhere from 0.5 out of 10 to maybe 2 out of 10 people will get accepted. So on average, our applicants are applying to 5 or more schools. Make sure to include a range of difficulty levels and culture and fit. Some of this is obvious, like, okay, why do I need to listen to this guy tell me to apply to a lot of schools? But the culture is really important. Even if you don't care about, first of all, I think you should care about culture because you're spending 2 years at a place, or maybe 1 year, depending on the program. But even if you say, well, I don't really care about the culture, well, the school cares. So the school wants you to know that you have thought about the program and that you've seen exactly how you're going to make an impact on campus. So pay attention to culture and fit. If you're not sure how to do that, then talk to students, talk to alums. Students are really, really good resources. A lot of schools have ambassadors that you can reach out to, and you can just Google contact a student XYZ school, and you'll find lists of people that you can reach out to and ask them some questions. Resume. This is really boring. And for those of you who heard me talk in person, some of this might overlap slightly. We need a resume. Okay, so a professional resume for MBA applications. Now, the professional resume for jobs is different. You might have industry context, you might have a lot of details around what you did. Perhaps you want to impress the next boss about the deals that you've worked on, the size of the deals, all the revenue of the deals. None of that really matters that much to business schools. If you're doing deals, or if you're creating new sites or creating new marketing materials, whatever it is, the fact that you're doing that work at all is something that tells admissions directors something about you, but all of the different numbers and maybe client names, things like that just aren't really that important. Make sure to not use job descriptions in the resume. So, if this says don't outline your job description, really don't use a job description bullet at all. If you're not sure whether you're using a bullet that's a job description, then you're probably using a bullet that's a job description. That's what I would say. Anything that you write that someone else from your company could also potentially write might be a little too basic and might not say specifically about your key accomplishments. So measurable results, specific work. When I say measurable results, if you don't have a number, that's okay. Some people do things and they just don't have specific numbers for the things that they do. There might not be a key takeaway. But at least let's talk about how you did these things, who you worked with, right? Focus on skills that are transferable. If you're working in a niche industry and you're applying to business school, your expertise in that industry might not really matter that much. But what matters is the way that you think, perhaps the way that you communicate, the way that you analyze, even if you're analyzing something that's different from what you would be analyzing in school. So think about transferable skills. And also, things outside of work are important. I often get questions on resumes that you're like, well, how much do I talk about my other interests, and how many extracurriculars do I put on a resume? It really just depends on the strength of your activities, but it is good to balance out professional achievements as well as hobbies, passions. Also, interests. Interests are great. If you have a really unique interest, perhaps you like to make baskets. You're a basket weaver, right? That's kind of interesting. Put that down. Perhaps that's a conversation starter. Oh, tell me about the baskets. How many baskets do you weave? Where did you first learn how to do basket weaving, right? It's just something that could be a nice conversation starter and catch an interviewer's eye. check to see. I don't believe we have any questions. Oh, we just got a question. So, okay, so how detailed should the resume be? Should we list all of the work experiences that we have, or sorry, the scrolling feature is not that great in the webinar, or just the most recent ones? Yeah, so I would list all of the work experience that you have, unless you are applying to an executive MBA and you have a lot of experience, maybe 15 years of experience, and you just don't have space. But it's good to list all of the different experiences that you have since college. Internships could be included or perhaps not included. Either one is fine. I usually like to have, perhaps one internship or two internships. It just depends on how attractive the internships are. But most of the work should be focused on the professional experience. Okay, a lot of resume questions. Try to answer a little more before going down. For consultants, do you break down experience by project? Great question. Yes. So we do a lot of work with consulting firms, and I often talk with them about this. So either way is fine, actually. Personally, I don't like to break down experience by the project, but that's just Scott's personal preference. That's not what's right or wrong. The reason I don't like it is because that forces you into a box. It forces you into a certain number of projects and certain numbers of bullets per project. When I applied, and I was a consultant, right? I mentioned at Deloitte, I probably wrote about 40% of what I did in the resume, and the rest of it just wasn't that important. So I had some project experience that took up, 3 or 4 bullets. It was just a really great project. Another project that was only 1 bullet. I just didn't do things that were that exciting. So if I did separate it by project, it would look a little bit weird that way. But if it's more, let's say, digestible for you to separate it by project, it's perfectly fine. Thanks for correcting the typo on the question. No worries, I figured what you were asking. Is it a good idea to add internships? Yep, so we just talked about that. Question about the length. For full-time MBA programs, that's 1 year or 2-year MBA or Columbia January term or a part-time MBA, 1 page max. Absolute hard rule, 1 page. Multi-page resumes, you could submit, excuse me, you could submit a 2-page resume if you're applying to an executive MBA, but definitely not for a full-time MBA. All right, we'll do one more question here. What if my past experience is not related to my future goals, but my extracurricular activities are more related? Should I still write a lot about my professional experience? Unfortunately, yes, because that's what you've done professionally, and the schools want to know what you've done from a professional standpoint. So I wouldn't write. It's a really smart question, but I wouldn't write any less about your professional experience because you're changing the job. Okay, one last question. Should graduate study or research done during graduate study be noted as experience? It doesn't really matter how you classify things. Something like that is middle ground. You could call it experience. I usually say experience is if you get paid for it. So if you're getting paid for research work while in school, then that's experience. If it was volunteer, if it's part of your education, then that might go under the education section or the volunteer section. Okay. So we'll go on. I'll get back to some of these questions as we go. So week 1, what should you do? Develop your personal story. Make sure to think about your goals and nail down recommenders. This is really important. We probably should have put recommenders first. But for the recommenders, you want to make sure to give them plenty of time. So personal story. First, what is a personal story? It's what's interesting about you. You want to tell schools something about you. Admissions directors spend different numbers of minutes per application, but it's not forever. It's like 12 to 35 minutes, let's say, per school. I have some of the numbers by school. You want to make sure that you have a pretty unique story, one that will stand out. So what drives you? What are your passions? What makes you unique from others? It doesn't have to be that you are the best person at your company or that you've been promoted faster than anyone else, but think about what has shaped you. Actually, a couple schools this year asked specific questions about what shaped you, and that's important to them. Even schools that don't ask that, it's still important to them. So think about what shaped you, and think about having a newer picture on a slide with headphones that don't have cords. Clearly, this is an old slide. or an old picture. So personal story, this is a little bit of an exercise. I'll ask you to do this yourself. When I do this exercise in person, I have audience participation. For now, I guess you can raise your hands and vote. I think there's polling here. I'm probably not going to do it right, but if you can raise your hands and vote, feel free to do that. So how many of you think Jenny has a better personal story, more unique personal story? If I see hands, there's a little hand icon. You can raise the hand if you think that. We like Jenny. Jenny has the better personal story. Okay, see some hands. How about Michael? Who likes Michael? So in this case, Michael's story is a little bit better. And the reason is things are connected more here. We have, let's say, some client experience in technology, and then we want to go and build product management expertise, eventually run PM at a tech firm. The past experience is connected to the goals. Not that they have to be. Some of you might have heard my presentation, top 10 pitfalls to avoid. If you haven't, send me an email and we can send you the deck or show you a video from some of the talks that I give on that. Goals do not have to be totally connected to the past, but it's nice if they are. Also, the extracurriculars are connected. You know, we're teaching underprivileged kids how to swim. We're mentoring kids. We're involved in swimming. It's easy to understand. Note, however, that the two different aspects of Michael's story, the professional aspect and the extracurricular aspect, have nothing to do with each other. And that is perfectly fine. It's nice to have a couple different things. Now, if everything's related to healthcare and you've just been involved in healthcare and everything that you're doing is centered around healthcare, then it's perfectly fine for them to be connected. For those of you who just joined, we're going over things to think about as we prepare the applications. I'll give an overview and introduction to myself at the end as well for those who came in after we started. So recommenders, I have a whole talk on recommendations. We could spend an hour talking about recommenders. We'll spend a few minutes here. You don't need to ask the highest person in your company. Now, it's perfectly fine if you do, but overall, you want to be asking people who can write very good letters. The bar for these letters is extremely high, especially when firms like Personal MBA Coach get involved and, let's say, guide the recommenders from a strategic standpoint in terms of what content they should cover. Make sure to ignore title, ignore prestige. Now, to be clear, all things being equal, if you're comparing an A+ letter from person A, who's the head of the company and also maybe a graduate of the school, and another A+ letter from someone who's been working for 4 years in management, perhaps the head of the company will carry a bit more weight as long as they can talk very specifically about you. The reason that I usually say you don't need to worry about title is because on average, someone who is more experienced in a company generally spends less time working with you than a direct manager. So make sure to, start doing things that you want your recommenders to write about in the letters. When I was applying, I wasn't very strong from an analytical standpoint, even though I went to MIT for undergrad. I could do it, but just at work, I wasn't doing a lot. I didn't have a lot of experience in analytics, probably because of the projects. So I started doing things that were a little bit more analytical in nature. That way, when my recommenders started writing the letters, I was confident that they would, cover some of these aspects in the letters. You could ask non-professional references if you have a really strong extracurricular, but don't feel the need to do this. Ask references early. What is early? If you're applying round 1, it's yesterday, right? Ask them. If you haven't asked, you should get on it and ask, because you want to give people time, ideally a few weeks to write a letter, and then, perhaps they're sharing a preview of it with you and you can review it. So you want to have time to review as well. Make sure to not do any writing of any of these letters. Very, very important. Don't even write 5 consecutive words for a recommender. The schools will catch it. You won't get accepted, or your acceptance will be revoked later on. That's even worse. If a recommender asks you to get involved, and I know this happens, don't do it. There are other ways around it. We can talk about it offline if you're interested to hear what we do with clients, but yeah, make sure to not get too involved. So let's see, go back to some questions. So this was back on the resume. How far back years of experience in extracurriculars is it okay to include? Yeah, so you can go back as far as you want. If you're applying to joint degree program, do you have 2 different resumes? So it depends on what the program is. In general, I would say it's not required to have 2 different resumes, but if the joint degree program is looking for something different, like let's take a policy program, right, in Harvard Kennedy School, they have, first of all, they have a whole different resume template that they want you to use and different things that they want on the resume, so it is important, but not necessarily for all joint degrees. Do reapplicants hold less of a chance of success in securing admissions for schools such as Columbia, Cornell, and Yale? Not at all, not at all. So we work with a lot of reapplicants. You know, people apply the first time, they don't get in, they come back to us. I mean, we have near perfect rate for reapplicants, so it's definitely not worse. That said, you do have to be stronger the second time around, of course. What about being super unique? How do I suggest to thread? I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but uniqueness comes in many different ways or shapes, let's say. You can have unique work experience, you can have unique extracurriculars. Can I expand on influential or informal alumni notes? Yes, definitely. So this is important. You know, I don't want everyone to go out there and, you know, submit a whole bunch of secondary letters and then schools get bogged down with letters, but it is certainly possible for someone who is either a current student or an alum, or maybe someone very successful in business or politics, to write another letter of support. But these are short. This is like 1 paragraph, 1 short paragraph, maybe 2, where you are asking the person to endorse you for the school. Just like if you were to recommend someone for a job, you might say something to HR. Now they may or may not get hired, but you know, HR will take an extra look. So that's essentially what that is. What about a recommendation packet? Yeah, so what we do with all of our clients, we have what I call this LOR one pager. It's not a packet. I don't like packets because I get feedback from a lot of recommenders that process is hard, let's make it easier. I know some firms and even some companies that I give talks at have these big PowerPoint templates that you send to the recommender, all these details about you. It just makes things exhausting. Keep it simple. You want to write some short bullets for the recommender. What we do is we have what I call an LOR one pager, and all of our clients fill this out. We do 1 or 2 edits of that and pass it off to the recommender. Essentially, we want to tell them these certain points that they should highlight. Maybe someone has a low quant score, and therefore I have the recommenders focus on the analytical experiences. Whatever it is to support things. I got a repeat question about reapplicants. So there is not a lower admit rate for reapplicants. That's not the case. So actually, roughly 10% of most classes are made up of reapplicants. If a school only asks for 2 rec letters, does it hurt if sharing more if they elaborate on your diversity at work, extracurriculars, volunteer, etc.? No, if they ask for 2 letters, I would write 2 letters. They're asking for 2 letters for a reason, and some schools are actually reducing the number of rec letters. MIT went down to 1. Michigan has had 1 letter for a while. Honestly, the name of the game is to just pay attention to the directions. Follow the directions. If they don't ask for something, it's because they don't want it. Correct, yes. Any packet should be no more than a page. That's my preference. Okay, great. So how to make a good recommendation letter. And maybe you should have your recommender dial into the webinar to read this, since they're the one actually writing the letter. Specificity, recency, honesty, and detail. I'll let you read through this. I don't like to read slides too much. That's a little bit boring. But what I will comment on, specificity, that's kind of obvious. Be specific. Recency, ideally within the last few years or so. If you go back to 4 years, that's fine. You have 7 years of work experience, you get 2 recommendations from your first 2 jobs that you've had in years 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4. It's not going to look that great, because what have you done lately? Honesty is really, really important here, and I can't stress this enough. They want to recommend you. they should be very strong in their recommendation because, as I mentioned, the bar is very high, but this has to be believable. You are not perfect. I'm not perfect. There are a lot of things that I need to improve upon, and that's the case with everyone. And so if you have someone who writes a letter that's just so strong, especially if your essays are so strong and you're a top performer, the school might think, actually, do they need to come to school? Is this the right program for them? And so you want to make sure that these letters are honest. As you're having a conversation with your recommender, tell them this. Tell them that when it comes to critical feedback, first of all, fill it out. Fill it out. I saw 4 rec letters this week that didn't have the feedback filled out, and I'm wondering what the recommenders are doing and why they're not reading the directions. Make sure to fill out, if they ask for critical feedback, fill out the critical feedback and make it critical. It's not Mary took on too much work and didn't balance her work life enough. That's horrible. Actually write something that's bad. What did Mary do that was poor? What was the negative result of something that Mary did? And now maybe you can turn it around and say, okay, so now what is she doing better? But make sure that there really is critical feedback. And then detail is important. So the detail meaning, let's tell the admissions director what you're doing specifically, especially if you're doing something that's technical or hard for someone to understand. Make sure that the recommender goes into enough detail to explain what it is that you're actually doing. Okay, so let me see if there are any more recommendation questions. Nope. Okay, great. So next, drafting and editing essays, networking with alumni and current students. So in terms of the drafting and editing essays, right? These are some principles. Of course, many other principles. Answer the question that's asked. This seems obvious, but this is actually one of my top 10 pitfalls in my 10 pitfall presentation I give. Answer the question that's asked. The pitfall is not properly answering the question. Often I see folks, sometimes before we get working with someone, and sometimes even after a conversation with brainstorming, when we brainstorm the essays and go through exactly how to write them and how many words to devote to each particular question. I know some of my clients are on the line, so thanks for joining. I'll be talking with some of you about more essays soon. Make sure to answer the question that's asked, right? If the question asks about your post-MBA goals and what the school will do for you in order to get there, and it's a 500-word question, and you write 230 words about the past and your mother and some personal experience and middle school and things like that, nobody really cares. We'll get very bored very quickly. Be specific and answer the question. If you're not sure what is actually being asked in the question, that's one of the ways that we get involved to help tell you, just based on experience and analyzing these applications with admissions directors and these sort of mock sessions that we do where we're talking through profiles. We can get a sense of like what's actually being looked at here. Next, write authentically. I know admissions directors say to be yourself and present yourself, and sometimes applicants say, well, is that true? Or are they just saying that? That really is true. It's easy to tell if you're not authentic. Remember that you're going to be interviewing with all these schools. Now, some schools have interviewers who read the applications and then interview you, like MIT, like Harvard. Some schools have different people that interview you who do not read the application, like a lot of other schools, Columbia, Stanford, Booth, Kellogg, the list goes on, a lot of schools. And especially if you're having a school interview you who read the whole application before they interview you, it's even more important to be super, super authentic. But regardless, make sure that they fit with your personal story. Don't repeat yourself too much in the process. You only have so many essays to write, and you want to make sure that you're using your time wisely. This approachable language is important. We put this bullet on here because often we get I won't say often actually, but sometimes, it's probably rare, we get essays from people who are just trying really, really hard. And I know it comes from a good place, it comes from a positive place. We're trying to just make this essay super, super strong, and we write all these advanced words that are complicated, and we make it sound like we're trying to win a Pulitzer Prize. It's not a good essay. Good essays are essays that are easy to read, quick, short sentences, not run-on sentences, approachable language, the story is strong, the arguments are strong, but this is not a complicated piece of writing. I've never won a writing prize, yet we have the highest success out there. We're just writing really, really specific and powerful essays that are not too complicated. So if you're writing a word and you're like, you're not sure if 3 of your friends would know the meaning of the word, just delete it because it might make you, let's say, not look good. So put it politely. So essay writing is a multi-step process. Make sure to have time. This is why I say it's debatable how much you can do for round 1 if you really haven't gotten started yet. I wouldn't say that you can do 7 schools for round 1 at this point, for instance. You know, there's not time for that. You have to brainstorm, outline. Outlining is important. So I often like when an applicant outlines, especially if they're not sure exactly what they want to write, or maybe if they're not a super strong writer. That allows you to stick to the word count. Word count is super, super crucial here. If you are writing a 500-word essay and you write a draft that's 800 words because it's easier for you to do that, that's just a bad move. Your essay is not going to end up as strong, or it'll take you forever to actually have it get there. So we actually have a 20% rule for all of our clients, where when you write the first draft, no more than 20% past the limit. And that's a pretty strict rule because it allows us to make sure that we're writing strong content, we're staying on point, and we're not getting lost as we're writing. So if you outline and you write down the number of words that you want to do for each section, it allows you to stay on task, let's say. Draft, editing, proofreading, right? These are sort of obvious. So as you edit, right, you're putting finishing touches on the essays. If you're not working with someone else, and obviously I feel like it's beneficial to do that, and I'll tell you more about what we do at the end, but let's say you're not for some reason, make sure that someone else reads the essays who's not in your industry, but please don't have a whole lot of people read your application. It will just complicate things. Even if you have 5 people who are fantastic, let's say they're the best editors in the world, and you have them all read your essays, pick one of them. Because if you have too many people, too many cooks in the kitchen, you'll lose your story. There are multiple right opinions. I've seen many times where we go through a whole process and a client maybe goes to 3 friends to ask their opinion, and then the essay just gets destroyed. So make sure to get opinions early on if you're writing. Doing the whole process and then sending it to a group of 5 people is just a recipe for disaster. You'll just get a whole bunch of different opinions at the end. You'll have to start over. It's not really that helpful. But you do want to ask someone if your essay seems authentic. And to do that, it's important to have someone who's very honest with you. So someone who can tell you that your writing sucks and it needs a lot of work and you're sounding obnoxious as you're writing. We'll use those words as we're working with applicants, hopefully not too often, but sometimes we say that. We say, look, you don't sound great when we read this essay. And like, I know that you're a great person, but it's not coming across, it's a little bit too aggressive. So networking is great to do because you learn about programs and you can make a connection. So how to network, some of this is obvious, but the alumni network, people in your office, family, friends, as you're talking with people, make sure to do your research ahead of time so that you know what they do. You can have questions to ask that will teach you more about the program and more about their experiences. And please, please, please do not ask for favors right away. If you're developing a network, and I know I said, okay, let's have some influential folks to write letters on your behalf, make sure to wait, until the end to ask for favors. Less is more here. What I mean by this is it's possible to do too much of this. It's possible to have too many people write a letter on your behalf. It's possible to have too many conversations, right? You want to be cool, calm, and collected throughout this process. So having a few conversations is probably fine for school. Let me see if there are any questions. Okay, a lot of questions. So just joining the webinar, welcome, thanks for joining. Is it possible to get that full recording? Yes, we do have full recording. Send me an email. I think if you registered, we'll be able to send you a link afterwards and we can send a link to the recording. And then I'll get to listen to myself, which is always fun. Being authentic would be quick. Main points flowing out themselves. And why do people spend months in writing the essay? Well, because the essays are not very long. Short essays are hard to write. If you're writing a 300-word essay around what you'll do to improve a community at school, it takes a lot of time to make sure to perfect the writing, and that's where we come in. Should you tie the personal story with things on your resume? Say your brand as a leader. Should you touch resume elements and maybe disparate from your actual job but emphasize leadership in that aspect? I would say yes. That sounds like a good idea. I work in a very small team setting, only you and the manager. Does it hurt the application that you don't have enough teamwork experience? I don't think so. Maybe you've done projects with other people. Perhaps you're doing extracurriculars with other people. If you truly have not worked in a team at all, I would say it's time to start thinking about some things that you should be doing. How long should the essay be if there's no word limit? Well, it depends on the school, so we have to talk about that offline. There's not a perfect length, and there's more than one school without a word limit, so it really does depend on the school. So I think I talked a little bit about the networking. Any tips on the MIT cover letter? How does that compare? Yeah, so MIT cover letter is very different. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into it today, but it's probably the most unique, and I would say the hardest piece to do relative to others. What we do is super specific for the MIT cover letter. I know MIT really well. We send a lot of people there every year. It is a pretty specific process, and it's not one that we'll go into great detail on today, but it's definitely not a personal story essay, nor is it a goals essay at all. Should you ask a peer to be a recommender if they are the co-founder? Yes. So if you are working in a company with 2 executives and you're one of them, then a peer can be a recommender. But that's the only way a peer can be a recommender. If you're in a company of 100 people, 200 people, then you don't want to ask someone at your level. But if you are both co-founders, then yes, a co-founder can definitely be a recommender. Great question. Okay, so save time for last minute items. We work with all clients through this project tracking tool that we have, where we keep track of everything that they need to do. We have deadlines and reminders and tasks. Whether you're working with someone who can offer that for you or not, make sure to finish ahead of the deadline. No editing in the last couple of weeks. It's kind of a golden rule so that you don't rush things. And things like, let's say, check in with your recommenders, right? Give them early deadlines. Ask them how you can help them think through your story. You can share essays with recommenders if you want. This is very optional. We should have written this as optional here. It's not required by any means, especially if you haven't finished the essays yet. But the short answer questions are important. For some schools like Harvard, they're really important, right? They're asking a lot of details in the short answers. So Stanford has some new short answers this year, so they're also important. Make sure to spend time on them, and don't just wait until the end when we fill out the application. And then proofread, right? Fresh set of eyes is really important. Even with us, so as we work through the process, I'm the founder of the company. I'll work with applicants through the process. We have second set of eyes, graduate English professor on our team who teaches creative writing. You'll have one other editor with me behind the scenes to make sure that we're perfecting the writing process as we go. But even at the end, we have a separate proofreader who has no idea about you, has not looked at any of your essays, to proofread everything. Fresh set of eyes is important for proofreading, not necessarily for like, hey, here's this idea. I used to review essays years ago, and now I'm going to come back and tell you in the 9th hour, here's what you need to be doing differently. That's probably a little bit dangerous at the end. Get that opinion earlier on. But at the end, you definitely do want to have someone proofread to make sure that you're doing everything correctly. And this is kind of a fun picture. As you can tell, I don't create my own slides. I just talk to them. But this one's kind of fun. The quick brown fox jumps. So our clients have been accepted at all the top schools. So there's probably not a school that you're applying to where our clients, either aren't at now or haven't graduated from recently, or probably both. And also they get a lot of scholarships. Scholarships are given based on the merit of the application and the overall, test score. Now, a little bit of details about myself. I know some of you joined at the end. I went to MIT for undergrad, worked at Deloitte in consulting, and went to Wharton for my MBA. These are some rankings. So recently I was ranked top consultant on a number of different sites. In terms of what we do at Personal MBA Coach, we help folks throughout the entire process. So we start with tutoring. If you want tutoring for the GMAT, we have 7 tutors on staff, in-house software that we use to guide through the tutoring sessions, and it's all very, very personalized. So you might spend some time on quant, might spend some time on verbal. We're teaching tips, we're teaching tricks, we're watching you answer questions and helping you to answer them better. I'm on the board of directors for the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants, and so we do a lot to work closely with admissions directors throughout the year. I travel around the world and give talks on applying to schools with the MBA Tour and various other organizations. And as we go through the process, we have a team of 12 former interviewers that help as we go through mock interviews, and we have former clients to network with at all the top schools. So what is sort of a life cycle of, working with us? Maybe you're starting with tutoring. We're doing some brainstorming. We're figuring out what are your passions and interests and challenges. We develop your personal story. This is a very brief overview. If you are interested in discussing, please email me offline. I don't give too many details in these recordings, but then we'll go through school selection, help you to think about the schools. We'll edit the resume. We talked about resumes a little bit earlier today. For essays, we have an unlimited model for essay editing and give very specific outlines as we go through the essays. And then we'll guide you through letters of recommendation and help the recommenders think through what they should write about. And for mock interviews, again, we have interviewers from many of these top schools, interview guides for all the schools with sample questions that you'll get asked. Here's a guide, a Kickstart guide. If you can, I don't think you can actually click on this because this is just a presentation. But we'll send out this deck to everyone who registered, and you can click on the link or just go to personalmbacoach.com. We have a lot of materials. There's some videos down at the bottom of the page and other guides as you sort of think through the planning process. I'm happy to take any other questions now. I know there were some questions sort of hanging out here, so I'll now go back here and we'll go through them in order. Okay, and feel free to ask about anything that's not as part of this presentation. How to tackle a 60-second video about you and your interest? Yeah, so that's a good question. First of all, it depends on the school, because different schools want different things in their video, whether they tell you that or not. But you want to think about showing an admissions team something else about you that you're not showing in the rest of the application. I know that's sort of vague, but depending on the school, the videos might be somewhat different. Generally, what makes you interesting? Let's say you're creating a profile video for like a social site, social media site, or dating site or something like that. What are you putting on this video? What do you want someone to know about you that's kind of exciting? It's not, where you're from and what you did growing up and what you're doing for work. Make it interesting, make it exciting. I want the co-founder to be a wreck, but we both know her writing skills are not great, but insanely smart and authentic. Should I flag that as a risk when considering her? I would say potentially yes. I mean, this person is going to be writing a letter on your behalf. They don't grade the recommender on their writing skills necessarily, but that said, someone who's a better writer might write a better letter. So I think that would be a factor. And that's actually one of the questions that we ask folks as we're helping them to think through which recommenders they want to choose. When we say 96% success rate, is that 96% success helping getting someone into one of their MBA programs or into their top programs? Is the success rate for the package or any services? Yeah, so we pretty much do the comprehensive packages for everyone. And 96% means 96% of people will be successful or were successful getting into one of their top schools when applying to 5 or more schools through our comprehensive packages. And most people will do 5 or more schools with us. So that's what that metric is. Do you think the ratio of admits are between those who do process alone versus those with a professional service? Do I think that differs? Yeah, it's a really good question. So to be honest, I like to talk about data when I have data. I don't have that data, so I can't speak to that specifically. And it is conjecture to say otherwise. I mean, what is my guess? My guess is the success rate is higher. I mean, our success rate is a lot higher than the average. People get a lot more scholarships than the average. So my guess is that the success rate is a lot higher when working with a consultant. And it's certainly different across consultants, let's say. But I don't have a specific pool of data to exactly prove that. It's a good question, though. What is the quickest way to understand the unique qualities or strengths of each business school? Quickest? So I think there's an issue with that question because it's not a quick process. I don't recommend trying to spend 10 minutes to figure out what a school is about. If you do that, and there are ways to do this quickly. I won't actually directly answer the question, and I apologize for that. Because if you're trying to do that really quickly, then it's just going to come off not genuine. Like, oh, Kellogg's a marketing school. Let's talk about my interests and let's talk about marketing because that's what Kellogg knows. It's just going to look like you didn't really do your homework. To know a school well and to show that you're knowledgeable about a school and passionate about a school, you show up in an interview and you convince them that you really want to go to that program. That's not a quick process. It's just not. It can't be. right? Because your interest and your, let's say, the things that you want to do at the school should be specific to you, and the 70 other people on this webinar would have different interests and different reasons why they want to pick a school. So I don't think there should be a quick way to get to know a school. And apologies for not answering that question. How much time should you leave between taking the GMAT and applications? Well, it depends. I mean, in an ideal world, you finish the GMAT before you start the essays, but given where we are in the season, I understand that that's often not the case. Half of our clients are doing tutoring with us while doing the applications. And so, from the time when you finish the GMAT, I mean, it could be the day before. I have a lot of people who just need more time. They plan on finishing the test in early April, and then maybe it's end of December. It's New Year's Eve day, maybe when they take the GMAT and get a good score, then they submit 2 days after. So as long as it's the day before, that's fine to submit. Ideally, you're finishing, a month, 2 months ahead so that there's a lot of cushion, but technically you could take the test right up to the end. It's actually easier to take the test at the end and cram for a test than to do essays. So we have some people who start with us and let's say they need more time with test prep. So we'll finish the applications and then they'll spend the last, 4, 6, 7 weeks before deadline to cram for the GMAT again and take the test one last time. It's easier to cram for that than, as I mentioned at the beginning, to do, 7 applications in a few weeks. How many months do you recommend to allocate for a comprehensive package with Personal MBA Coach? So it depends on how many schools you're doing and which schools, let's say. But on average, let's say if we're doing 5 or 6 schools, ideally you're looking at a couple months to go through the process. And that can vary depending on your schedule and how much free time you have. But would love to talk to you about your specific situation offline. So feel free to reach out. Let's see, I think there's some more questions. So some of them are probably not good for the public. Okay, so hi, I'm considering applying to round 2. Kindly let me know ideal condition at this point in terms of GMAT score and essay. I'm not sure I understand the question, ideal condition, GMAT essay. So maybe you're talking about the timing. If not, please retype the question. I know everyone's on mute, sort of a default process here. So feel free to retype the question if I'm not answering the one that you're thinking about. But I would say if you're doing round 2, ideally we're spending July, we're spending August, we're spending September on GMAT. And you get a score in the end of September, and then October, November, you're doing essays, and December, ideally you're not doing essays at all, you're not rushing, you can proofread, you can sort of be casual. So that's what an ideal timeline would look like. Obviously that's built in with some flexibility. Do schools ever contact the recommenders? Yes, absolutely. They are definitely subject to contacting the recommenders. I have a very specific example that I'm not allowed to talk about publicly on video, but let's say it resulted in someone not going to that school because of something that happened when a school reached out to a recommender, and I'll stop there. So yes, a school can definitely contact the recommenders, and so that means that you should tell the recommenders that this might happen and pick recommenders who, let's say could be fine on the phone. It's not very common though. It's definitely not common. Does Personal MBA Coach pre-screen clients to identify if they're capable of your schools? Yes, definitely. We don't take everyone who's interested. We have more demand than we take. We do a lot of these things and talks and things like that. So we absolutely pre-screen clients, sometimes before even getting on the phone, to be honest, and definitely before deciding if we're working together and if you're capable of reaching your schools. And so if you're interested in being screened, feel free to send a note. If you are below the GRE or GMAT range by a couple of points, is it worth applying to top tier programs? Yes, I mean there are ranges, right? And without seeing the whole resume and knowing the whole story, it's hard to say for sure. I don't want to give a generic answer because I hate generic answers, but it really does depend, to be honest. I would say you also have to think about who you are and what other people you are competing with. And that's very vague, who you are, but people are evaluated differently based on different characteristics about themselves. And some groups are just more competitive, whether it's, let's say, an industry. If you are applying from private equity and you're applying with people who are just super smart and super strong, the average applicant in a client-facing role in private equity might have like 20, 25 points above the median score. So if you have a few points below, that's going to look pretty bad, versus if you're applying from a different background with people that just aren't used to the process and don't apply quite as often, and you're doing this great work in Uganda helping folks with clean water. Yeah, like they might take you if you're below the average, because you're not living in this like GMAT tutoring world for 4 years where you're sort of surrounded by it. How long should applying to 3 to 4 schools take? Is it plausible if starting now, if GMAT is already completed? Usually maybe a little under 2 months for 3 to 4 schools. It depends if you're working with a consultant or not. It's much quicker if you work with a consultant, especially if you're working with us. We turn things around pretty quickly and help you through the process. If you're applying on your own, it might take a little bit longer. I would say, depending on the school and their deadlines, that might impact what you can do in round 1 and what might end up being round 2. There are very different deadlines by schools, and so that would impact that. However, don't get hung up too much on round 1 versus round 2. There is a difference, but the difference is not huge, and we send a lot of great people to schools in round 2. So if you're on the border of thinking about whether you should rush or not, you're better off having a stronger application than rushing. Can I share the most important objective criteria, like return on investment, while selecting the schools? Which website would you recommend to compare? I don't know that there's one objective criteria. I don't think ROI is anything that applicants should really look at. And I know some people have differences of opinions there. These are just numbers. If you look at average salary, you're not going to be average. No one's average. So I don't know that it's really that helpful. I think it's more important to look at what companies are recruiting from a school. Are companies recruiting that you want to work for? Look through what types of jobs people are getting. Look through where people are coming from and where they're going to. How likely are you to get there? You could apply to a school that has an average salary that's $18,000 more than the next school, and then you could go there and not get any of the jobs that are recruiting because you're not strong enough to get them, and that won't help you at all. So I know the numbers are out there and I understand why, but I don't really put a lot of emphasis on them. I think it's more important to get to the right program that's the right fit for you, that can allow you to succeed, because the average could be average, but you're the top of the class or you're the bottom of the class. And I think finding the right program would allow you to succeed more than just getting the average. How can we approach current students to write endorsements or influential notes? Well, I think you can start by finding the students on school websites. Maybe schools have contact a student, contact an ambassador, things like that. Start to develop a relationship. It's not the case where you just find a student, email them, talk to them, and say, can you write a letter about me? That's not how it works. I mean, the letters are influential letters to recommend someone if they have a relationship with you and they feel like you would be a strong addition to the class. So you have to develop that relationship first, and it has to be natural. If it's not natural, it won't work. So it is something that you would need to cultivate over time. If I'm applying to 2 schools, what package would I recommend a client to purchase? So our packages are priced based on the number of schools that you apply to. If you go to personalmbacoach.com/services, if you are applying to 2 schools, then you would sign up for our 2-school comprehensive package. And I would ask, is that the right number for you? Just because the average is 5, 2 is a bit tight. We do from 1 to 14, so we can do anything. But yes, that would be the package. What is the best way to understand the unique qualities, strengths of each business school? Yeah, so this is sort of similar to the other question, except this is best, and the last question said quickest. So I think talking to students and alums are, talking is a great way to do that. Watching videos is really good. Videos are easy. It's like you're watching this. You're not doing anything. You're just listening. You might be having the TV on. I don't know. But I think watching videos is really helpful. visiting is good. And then reading course descriptions, I think, is important, because seeing the different things that each school focuses on and different courses that they focus on is helpful. Besides saying when your recommendation is ready, is there a difference between round 1 and round 2? I reworded that question a little bit. So it depends on the school. There's some schools that have a big difference between the rounds and some schools that have virtually no difference. It really does depend on the school. But without going into details by school, I would say that usually you're looking at a little bit of a bump in round 1, a few percentage points, a few percentage point difference in getting in, not total percentage points, but if you multiply, 3 to 5% maybe advantage round 1 versus round 2. But it really does depend on you and the school. A lot of people getting in round 2. I mean, we had people get in round 3 this year. Round 3 is usually pretty light, and I generally say, if you want to hire us in round 3, don't. That's usually my response. I know not all firms do that, but I'm just honest. That's usually what I do. But we actually got people in round 3 this year more than we usually do. So, any of these rounds can work, and I would really apply when you're ready to go. Is there a service that just helps with essays and interview prep? We don't have that. It's a really good question, and it's common. I know there are places that have a lot of consultants laying around. They need to bill, and they'll take any work that they can get. We don't do that. The main reason is essays. That's most of the process. So if you did a comprehensive package just with the essays, we're not really reducing the number of hours that we spend as a firm. So if you want help with the essays, that is the comprehensive package. But we do have separate interview prep services. So you could sign up for an interview prep session, and there are rates online. If you just want a 1-hour interview prep with a former interviewer from our team, that is something that we do offer separately, as long as you plan ahead, because that can fill up. Do you know how far in advance you must take the GRE before? So we answered that earlier. You can, oh no, sorry, you asked about the GMAT. Yes, so I answered about the GMAT. I believe it's similar for the GRE. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure people take it up to the end. So right before the test. My GMAT score is just average. How can I substitute that score during the application? Well, there are a few ways. One, you can take extra graduate level courses where you can study something analytical, and that can help you to look a little bit stronger in the application. You can have your recommenders write very strong things about you from an analytical standpoint. You can write bullets that are more quantitative on your resume. Maybe you've done a lot of different things and you remove some bullets about communication, and you add some bullets about modeling. There are different ways that you can showcase your analytical strengths in another way. Notice I say analytical. I'm not talking about the verbal. If you have a low verbal score, put it this way, it's not worth doing anything different to show them your verbal skills are better. They'll know if they interview you how strong your verbal skills are, and they can determine for themselves whether that's good enough to succeed in the school. How many times an average do you think is necessary to take in order to have good preparation for the GMAT? Some people take the test 1 time, some people take it 5, 6, 7, 8 times. There's not a perfect number of times to take the test. It really does depend on the applicant. I would say that, at some point you'll see diminishing returns, and people are taking the test multiple times. So I would say to do what is right for you, and depending on the school, depending on the person, I might give more specific advice. But I don't have a blanket number of times that's recommended. One of my tutors is actually a few of my tutors are former clients of mine, and one of them took the test 1 time, got a 790, doing great and super smart, right? And some people need to take it 4 or 5 times. So where's Personal MBA Coach located? So we're based in Boston, and we work with applicants around the world. I travel a lot for a lot of different talks, as some of you probably saw, and you've gotten emails from the MBA tour. So I will be in different cities at different times, but we're based in Boston, and we have a virtual model where we can work with people from all around the world, and we do. Half of our clients are international, half are domestic. You mentioned look for companies, industries that are recruiting from that school. Are these factors to mention in the essay? I think so. Yeah, if you're looking to go to a specific industry specific companies that are recruiting and that recruit often, and you write about goals in your essay, you could say, I'm excited to talk to companies such as XYZ that are, hiring students. And you don't have to necessarily say that are hiring students, but if you mention companies that have experience, hiring. Do you have experience in programs in the UK or France? Yes, we help applicants apply to schools around the world. So if you're looking at London Business School, INSEAD, Oxford, Cambridge, ESSEC, ESA, absolutely. And we actually have a conference that'll be we'll be going to next year in Europe with a lot of the European schools. So yes, we have experience with folks applying to schools around the world. Thank you. You're most welcome. Thank you. Perfect. Well, it is 9:02 Eastern Time, so we just finished. Thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate all the questions. If you have any other questions, you can email me, Scott, SCOTT, at personalmbacoach.com, and I'll be more than happy to follow up. So really appreciate the time. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. Thank you, everyone.